October 14, 1943. 15,000 feet above Schweinfurt, Germany. A German fighter pilot pressed his pencil against the worn pages of his logbook, noting what felt like just another day of combat. He had just claimed his 17th heavy bomber, a B-17 Flying Fortress that broke apart in flames spiraling downward, smoke trailing across the sky. From the cockpit of his Focke-Wulf FW-190, he watched the remaining bombers fighting to keep formation. Their gunners fired desperate bursts of .50 caliber rounds into the empty air. Long after his fighters had slipped away, the math of aerial combat was cruel. German fighters could pick the time of attack, dive out of the sun, and escape before the bomber gunners could respond. Without escorts, American bombers were simply massive, vulnerable targets. That morning, two 91 B-17s had crossed into German airspace to destroy the ball-bearing factories at Schweinfurt. By nightfall, 60 would never return, and another 17 were written off after limping back with irreparable damage. The Luftwaffe called it a turkey shoot. The Americans called it Black Thursday, the worst day in the history of the 8th Air Force. What no one realized at the time was that this triumph for Germany would soon mark the beginning of the end. Within only 4 months, the skies would belong to someone else. In late 1943, German confidence was unshakable. Pilots like Major Wilhelm Ferdinand Galland, brother of Adolf Galland, and Major Walter Dahl turned bomber interception into a deadly science. Their tactics, sharpened over months of victories, exploited every weakness in the American combat box formation. The standard formation used 18 to 21 bombers, arranged to cover each other with overlapping firepower. On paper, every angle was defended by the B-17's 13 .50 caliber machine guns. In practice, Luftwaffe pilots quickly discovered blind spots, ammunition shortages, and the psychological strain on bomber crews facing wave after wave of attacks. Heinz Knoke, commanding 5 JG-11, perfected the head-on assault. His method was straightforward but lethal. Approach from 12 o'clock high, dive straight through the formation at nearly 400 meters/hour, fire a 2-second burst at the cockpit and engines, then break away before the top turret could respond. On February 26, 1943, Knoke brought down his first heavy bomber, a B-24 Liberator named Maisie. By October, he had destroyed 16 more. The statistics reinforced German belief in victory. On the first Schweinfurt-Regensburg mission of August 17, 1943, the Luftwaffe shot down 60 bombers, wiping out 16% of the attacking force. The losses were so severe that deep penetration missions were halted for weeks. When the Americans tried again on October 14th, the outcome was even worse. 77 bombers lost or written off, and more than 600 airmen killed or captured in a single day. New tactics increased the pressure. Major Georg Peter Eder, group commander of Thupauku JG-11, developed the company front attack. 8 FW-190s approached side by side, flooding the bombers' defenses with too many targets at once. For American gunners, the sight was terrifying. 8 fighters closing at a combined speed of 600 mm/hour, leaving only seconds to react. Panic often meant wasted ammunition and no hits at all. The real reason for these devastating losses was range. No Allied fighter in 1943 could protect bombers deep inside Germany. The P-47 Thunderbolt, America's main escort, had a combat radius of only 375 miles even with drop tanks, barely enough to reach the border. The P-38 Lightning could fly further, but in Europe's cold, high-altitude conditions, its engines froze and controls locked, grounding it as a reliable escort. This left bombers exposed for hours over Germany's industrial heartland. Luftwaffe pilots simply waited at the point where Allied escorts turned back. They called it the Golden Moment. Oberleutnant Hans Philipp, credited with 206 victories before his death in October 1943, explained, "We tracked the bomber streams on radar, calculating exactly where the escorts would turn back. The moment the little friends left, we pounced. You could see the bombers tighten their formation. They knew what was coming. The result was deadly arithmetic. A B-17 group might spend 4 hours over enemy territory, yet only 90 minutes with fighter protection. German pilots could land, rearm, and attack again, sometimes flying 3 or 4 sorties against the same raid. The answer to this crisis came from an unexpected source. The P-51 Mustang did not begin as an American project at all. In April 1940, the British Purchasing Commission approached North American Aviation, asking for P-40 fighters. Instead, North American proposed building a brand new design in just 120 days. The prototype, the NA-73X, first flew on October 26, 1940, an extraordinary achievement in rapid development. The early Mustangs, powered by the Allison V1710 engine, were fast at low altitude but weak above 15,000 feet, making them unsuitable for bomber escort. The RAF used them for reconnaissance and ground attack, where their range and speed at low levels were useful. The true breakthrough came in April 1942, when Rolls-Royce test pilot Ronald Harker flew an Allison Mustang. Impressed by the airframe's clean design, he suggested fitting the aircraft with the Rolls-Royce Merlin 61 engine, the same one used in the latest Spitfires. By October 1942, the first Merlin-powered Mustang took to the skies. The change was revolutionary. Top speed jumped from 390 miles per hour to 440 miles per hour. High-altitude performance soared. The service ceiling rose from 31,000 feet to 42,000 feet. This marriage of American mass production with British engine technology created something neither country could have built alone. And the most important feature was not speed or altitude, it was range. The P-51 Mustang could finally escort American bombers all the way to Berlin. The P-51 Mustang's strength came from a combination of factors that no other single-engine fighter in the world could match. Its laminar flow wing, designed by North American's chief engineer Edgar Schmood, was exceptionally efficient. Unlike conventional wings, it kept smooth airflow farther back along the surface, reducing drag by almost 30%. That efficiency directly translated into fuel savings. While the P-47 Thunderbolt carried 305 gallons of internal fuel, the Mustang's smaller airframe held only 184 gallons, but it consumed far less. A P-47 used around 100 gallons per hour at cruise, while the P-51 burned only 65 gallons at the same speed. Even with less internal fuel, the Mustang could fly further. The addition of external tanks pushed its range into new territory. With 75-gallon drop tanks fitted in early 1944, the P-51B's combat radius stretched to 650 miles. By March, the introduction of 108-gallon tanks extended that to 850 miles, enough to escort bombers to Berlin, fight for 20 minutes, and still return to England. The first Mustangs went to the 304th Fighter Group, known as the Pioneer Mustang Group. They received their P-51Bs in November 1943 at Boxted, Essex. Though assigned to the 9th Air Force, they were quickly redirected to support 8th Air Force bomber missions. Their commander, Colonel Kenneth Martin, had just days to train his pilots on the new fighter after flying P-47s. Lieutenant Colonel Glenn Duncan, who would later command the 303rd Fighter Group, recalled his first flight. The moment I lifted off, I knew this airplane was different. It handled like a sports car compared to the truck-like Thunderbolt. It was quick, responsive, and above all, it could stay in the air forever. The Mustang's first combat came on December 1, 1943, during a fighter sweep over Belgium and France. The first escort mission followed on December 5 to Amiens, a short-range test with 16 P-51Bs. No enemy fighters appeared, but the mission proved the Mustang could operate at high altitude as an escort. On December 13th, Mustangs flew their first long-range escort to Kiel, nearly 490 miles from base, previously unreachable for Allied fighters. The shock was immediate. German pilots who expected to find defenseless bombers instead ran into aggressive American fighters deep inside their own territory. In the final weeks of 1943, the pace quickened. On December 20th, P-51Bs escorted bombers to Bremen, downing 3 German fighters without losing a single plane. The Luftwaffe, still relying on its old tactic of waiting for escorts to turn back, was caught off guard. At long distance, many Germans initially mistook the P-51B for the P-47. They waited for the Thunderbolts to turn back at the usual point, only to watch them keep going east. Confusion turned to alarm. Allied intelligence intercepted frantic German radio calls, with controllers asking pilots to confirm fighter types and positions. They could not believe Allied escorts had reached so far into Germany. The seriousness of the threat became clear on December 30th, 1943. Major Klaus Mitusch, commander of the 3rd JG-26, returned from a mission where Mustangs had chased his fighters all the way back to their landing approach. He reportedly told his men, "The air war has fundamentally changed. Our sanctuary no longer exists. That warning became reality on March 4, 1944. At 25,000 feet over Brandenburg, the outline of Berlin appeared through the clouds. Below lay the capital of Nazi Germany, the city Hermann Göring had sworn would never face enemy aircraft. Above it flew 660 American heavy bombers, protected by squadrons of Mustangs. Leading them was Colonel Donald Blakesley and the 4th Fighter Group, which had received its P-51Bs only on February 28th. Just 4 days later, they flew the first 100-mile round trip to Berlin. For Luftwaffe pilots rushing to intercept, the sight was unreal. They had always been told Allied fighters could never reach the capital. Yet here they were, fresh and aggressive after flying 500 miles, while German defenders were already low on fuel after takeoff. The battle was fierce. More than 200 German fighters rose to defend the city, but they faced not weary bomber gunners but eager Mustang pilots with superior aircraft and altitude advantage. That day, the 4th Fighter Group claimed 15 victories, while breaking up multiple German attacks before they reached the bomber formations. For American pilots, the Mustang felt like the fighter they had always dreamed of. Captain Donald Gentile of the 4th Fighter Group later said, "The Mustang gave us everything. Speed to catch the Germans, maneuverability to fight them, and range to go wherever the bombers went." The cockpit was small but functional. The inline engine gave far better forward visibility than the bulky radial engine of the P-47. Later versions, like the P-51D, would add a bubble canopy for even greater visibility. But even the P-51B's frame design offered solid all-around vision. Lieutenant Robert Powell of the 342nd Fighter Group recalled the physical toll. 6 hours in a Mustang meant 6 hours on oxygen above 10,000 feet. Your mouth went dry from the oxygen mask. Your back hurt from the parachute and dinghy pack. Your neck ached from constantly scanning for fighters. But the difference was we finally had the range to do the job. That made it worth it. The arrival of Mustangs over Berlin caused shock at the highest levels of the Luftwaffe. At first, Reichsmarshal Hermann Göring refused to believe it, even after seeing German gun camera footage clearly showing P-51s above the capital. He reportedly said, "When I saw Mustangs over Berlin, I knew the war was lost." Whether or not the quote was literal, the impact was undeniable. German strategy had relied on the idea that central Germany was safe from escorts. Airfields, factories, and training schools had been placed there for protection. Now that sanctuary was gone. With the P-51, American fighters could strike over Prague, intercept over Munich, and escort bombers to every critical target inside the Reich. The balance of the air war had shifted forever. Major Günther Rall, one of Germany's highest-scoring aces with 275 victories, clearly saw how the arrival of the Mustang changed everything. He later admitted, "The Mustang didn't just extend the bomber offensive. It transformed it. We could no longer choose when and where to fight. They brought the battle to us whenever they wished." The Luftwaffe tried a number of desperate tactics. Sturmgruppen units were created, flying heavily armed and armored FW-190s built to smash through escort screens and attack bombers at close range. But these slow, overloaded fighters were easy targets for the more agile Mustangs. The Germans also tried launching massed group assaults. Yet even then, the Americans had the numbers and the performance advantage to counter them. Between February 20th and 25th, 1944, the battle reached a turning point during what became known as Big Week. The 8th Air Force launched Operation Argument, striking German aircraft production with full P-51 escort. Over 6 days, 3 300 bomber sorties and 3 673 fighter sorties were flown. The Americans lost 226 bombers, but claimed more than 500 German fighters destroyed. The real blow, however, was the loss of experienced Luftwaffe pilots who could never be replaced. At the start of 1944, General James Doolittle took command of the 8th Air Force and issued new instructions. Instead of staying glued to the bombers, fighters were now ordered to seek out the Luftwaffe and destroy it wherever possible. Captain John Godfrey of the 4th Fighter Group described the change. "We'd escort the bombers to the target, but once they dropped, we went hunting. We dove to the deck, hit airfields, and caught German fighters taking off or landing. The war of attrition now heavily favored the Allies. In January 1944, the Luftwaffe lost 311 pilots. In February 2021, in March another 2015. Many of these were veteran aces with years of combat behind them. America, on the other hand, was training 11,000 new pilots every month. Losses could be replaced. Germany's could not. The P-51 brought more than just range. It was proof of America's industrial and technological edge. By late 1944, the K-14 computing gun sight was introduced, giving Mustang pilots a major advantage in deflection shooting. This gyroscopic sight automatically calculated the correct lead based on range and turn rate, making hits far more likely. In March 1945 alone, the 8th Air Force fielded 14 fighter groups, over 1,000 Mustangs in total. Facing them, the Luftwaffe could put up only 300 to 400 serviceable fighters on any given day, scattered across the Reich. Many stayed grounded for lack of fuel. Others were flown by teenage recruits with minimal training. Kill ratios reflected the disaster. By 1945, Mustang pilots averaged 10 kills for every loss. Lieutenant Colonel John Meyer of the 352nd Fighter Group, who ended the war with 24 victories all in Mustangs, admitted, "By 1945 it wasn't combat, it was execution. We circled German airfields waiting for takeoffs or landings and shot down anyone who appeared. The Mustang turned all of Germany into a combat zone." Captured Luftwaffe pilots confirmed this impact. General der Jagdflieger Adolf Galland later wrote, "The P-51 was perhaps the most significant fighter aircraft of World War II. Until it arrived, we dictated the tempo of air battles. After it, we never regained the initiative." Major Heinz Knoke, who survived with 33 kills, was more blunt. "The Mustang killed the Luftwaffe. Not the bombers, not the invasion. This fighter that could fly to Poland and back. We went from hunters to hunted in 3 months." Young pilots who joined the Luftwaffe late in the war gave some of the most revealing accounts. One captured airman explained, "I flew my first mission in November 1944 with only 55 hours of total flight time. On my third sortie, I saw Mustangs everywhere. At that moment, I knew we had lost not just the war but the sky itself." The Mustang's role extended far beyond aerial combat. Its ability to escort bombers deep into Germany enabled the systematic destruction of German industry. Oil production, the Reich's critical weakness, was reduced to only 10% of requirements by March 1945. The transportation system collapsed, halting the movement of troops and supplies. Aircraft factories continued producing planes, but with no fuel and no trained pilots, those machines were useless. General Karl Spaatz, commander of U.S. strategic air forces in Europe, concluded, "The P-51 was the decisive weapon system of the European air war. It made daylight bombing possible, enabled the invasion of Europe, and broke the power of the German military." The war also left lasting scars on those who survived. German pilots who entered combat in 1943 as confident warriors emerged, if they lived, as changed men. Many later admitted their first encounter with Mustangs deep over Germany was the moment they realized the war was lost. Some even became admirers of the aircraft and of their former enemies, astonished by American resources and humane treatment as prisoners. The contrast between Nazi propaganda and reality devastated morale. The P-51 Mustang also left a lasting legacy in aviation design. Its laminar flow wing showed how drag could be dramatically reduced. The blending of British engine technology with American airframe design became a model for future international cooperation, continuing through NATO and beyond. Most importantly, the Mustang proved that fighters could be more than short-range defensive machines. They could be strategic tools, projecting power hundreds of miles from their bases. This idea would shape everything from the F-86 Sabre in Korea to modern jet fighters with aerial refueling. The numbers alone show its impact: 15,486. Mustangs built 4,050. Enemy aircraft destroyed in air combat over Europe. 431 enemy aircraft destroyed on the ground. 9,254 locomotives destroyed. 283 combat sorties flown. 134,420 combat hours logged. 2,520 operational losses. Kill-to-loss ratio, over 11 to 1. But the true measure goes beyond statistics. The Mustang broke the Luftwaffe's will to fight, ensured the success of the invasion of Europe, and shortened the war by months, perhaps years. The shift from German pilots laughing at unescorted American bombers to complete collapse in the skies happened with astonishing speed. In October 1943, the Luftwaffe dominated the air over Germany, knocking down bombers at will. But by March 1944, the picture had changed. Mustangs were escorting bombers all the way to Berlin. By June 1944, the Luftwaffe was no longer an effective fighting force, and by April 1945, it had essentially ceased to exist as an air arm. This wasn't a slow decline, it was a total breakdown. The arrival of Mustangs deep over Germany triggered a chain of defeats from which the Luftwaffe never recovered. Each pilot lost could not be replaced with equal skill. Every aircraft destroyed reduced Germany's ability to train replacements. Each successful escort mission encouraged Allied leaders to strike deeper, harder, and more often. The numbers make this collapse painfully clear. In 1943, Germany lost 2,167 pilots. In 1944, the losses jumped to 12,037. Between January and May 1945 alone, another 4,238 pilots were lost. At the same time, average pilot experience fell off a cliff. In 1943, a new fighter pilot entered combat with more than 250 flight hours. By early 1944, this was down to 150 hours. By late 1944, it had dropped to just 80 hours. And in 1945, most young pilots had only 40 to 50 hours of training before being thrown into combat. Perhaps the Mustang's most powerful effect was psychological. It crushed the idea of German technological superiority, highlighted American industrial strength, and showed that democracy could create weapons even better than those of a dictatorship. The same Luftwaffe pilots who mocked unescorted American bombers in 1943 were, by 1945, refusing to take part in suicide missions against formations protected by Mustangs. Young German pilots raised on Nazi propaganda were stunned when they saw American superiority firsthand. Everything they had been taught about racial dominance, about German engineering, about American weakness, was shattered by the Mustang, a sleek, powerful fighter that ruled their skies. 4 decades later, in 1985, former American and German fighter pilots gathered in San Antonio, Texas for a reunion. The conversations revealed just how deep the Mustang's impact had been. Colonel Clarence "Bud" Anderson, who flew 116 combat missions in Mustangs and achieved 25 victories, raised his glass across the table to Gustav Rudel, Germany's 3rd highest scoring ace. Anderson toasted, "To the P-51 Mustang, the fighter that won the air war. We had great aircraft and excellent pilots, and we were fighting over our homeland. But you had the Mustang, and that made all the difference." Walter Schuck, who had flown both the FW-190 and later the Me-262 jet, added, "We went from laughing at unescorted bombers to hiding from Mustangs in just 4 months. No air force in history has ever faced such a complete reversal." Johannes Steinhoff, a Luftwaffe general who survived a terrible Me-262 crash in April 1945 and carried the scars for life, reflected, "In 1943, we laughed at your bombers because we believed America could never build a fighter with the range to reach Berlin. The P-51 Mustang taught us the danger of underestimating an enemy. You ask when we knew the war was lost. It was the day in March 1944 when we saw Mustangs over Berlin. At that moment, every German pilot knew the truth. The war in the air was over. The transformation from mocking unescorted American bombers to fearing Mustang fighters stands as one of the fastest and most complete reversals in military history. In less than 6 months, from October 1943 to March 1944, the Luftwaffe went from dominant to defeated, from hunters to hunted, from confident to broken. The Mustang was the catalyst for that collapse, but it represented more than just a machine. It symbolized American industry, Allied cooperation, and innovation driven by necessity, not ideology. German pilots who had been told that democracy made America weak discovered the opposite, that it gave the United States the ability to unite, innovate, and produce at a level Germany could never match. Back in October 1943, German confidence was based on facts. No single-engine fighter in the world had the range to escort bombers from England to Berlin and back. What they did not anticipate was American determination, the blending of British engine design with American airframe technology, and an industrial system capable of producing thousands of first-rate fighters in record time. When Mustangs flew over Berlin on March 4, 1944, the laughter stopped. In its place came grim recognition. Everything the Luftwaffe believed about its enemies, its own superiority, and the outcome of the war had been wrong. The P-51 Mustang didn't just win the skies, it destroyed myths, erased illusions, and proved that technological power comes not from ideology, but from industrial strength, cooperation, and democratic innovation. German survivors never forgot this lesson. In memoirs and interviews, they consistently pointed to the Mustang's arrival over Germany as the moment they knew the war was lost. Not the Normandy landings, not the fall of Berlin, but that single moment when Mustangs appeared over the Reich, escorting bombers with enough fuel left for combat. Nearly 79 years later, the P-51 Mustang still stands as the ultimate symbol of American dominance in the air war. It was the aircraft that silenced the laughter, ended Germany's command of its skies, and erased any hope of victory for the Reich. Those who laughed in 1943 learned by March 1944 that they had laughed too soon, and by May 1945 many of them were gone, their confidence buried with them. The story of the Mustang is more than history. It is a lesson. It shows the danger of underestimating an opponent, the strength of democratic industry, and the way a single weapon system can reshape the course of a global conflict. The P-51 proved that courage and skill matter, but in modern industrial war, victory belongs to the side that can build faster, train better, and innovate quicker. The transformation was swift, irreversible, and devastating. German laughter had turned to silence, and across the skies of Europe, the P-51 Mustang wrote its legacy as the fighter that destroyed the Luftwaffe and sealed the fate of Nazi Germany.